In this episode, we will learn that complex rules cause simple and stupid behaviors.
While simple rules allow for complex, intelligent behavior. Welcome to episode 31 of the Leading Complexity podcast. This is where we explore the art of leading organization in today's complex, hyper-competitive landscape. We do this together with some of the world's foremost thinkers within leadership. My name is Tomas Björkholm, and with me I have Michael Göthe.
In this episode, we will talk about self-organizing organizations, and we will do this together with Doug Kirkpatrick.
Doug was a CFO of Morningstar. Michael, I think you have a little bit more information about that company.
Yes, first of all, Doug is a kind of long-term friend of Chris. He has been visiting us multiple times talking about self-management. And his background is that he was a CFO and co-founded Morningstar together with Chris Rufus. And Chris Rufus had some ideas when he created Morningstar. And Morningstar is one of the biggest tomato processor companies in California. So that's a really big company. And when he started, Chris thought of a new way of organizing a company. He wanted it to be based on some simple principles. And he compared to in life that freedom is one principle. And when we organize our lives, we are free. We choose our way, how to live, how to buy a house, our spouse, and how we drive to work. He was kind of getting that idea when he saw people kind of driving to work. So freedom was one. The other one was accountability, or if you make agreements or if you have a contract. In civil law, there's a consequence if you break your contracts. So this accountability was the other principle, and those were the two principles that founded Morningstar and became this huge success in a self-managed company. And nowadays, Doug is sharing that experience and helping other organizations to kind of thrive in this more simple way of organizing.
Let's listen to Doug.
How would you describe complexity?
Well, complexity is using bureaucratic rules to organize activity in organizations. And it really started in the 1840s with the Industrial Revolution, companies trying to figure out how to create gigantic global or at least continent-wide organizations with rudimentary vestigial information systems and communication systems. And so created great bureaucratic organizational charts and rules and cumbersome regulations in order to sort of control and manage these large activities. And while that system worked fine, given the information systems at the time, it no longer works very well. And so we still have the same kinds of bureaucratic rules and regulations in a world where information moves at the speed of light and people are able to react to signals in the environment and to make decisions at the level closest to the customer. And so we're in this strange liminal state where we're trying to manage great cumbersome bureaucracy that adds zero value. In fact, it creates negative value for the world. At the same time, we're trying to make great progress and create value for human beings in the world. And so this mismatch of complexity and basic human needs is creating lots of tension. And there are ways to get around it, some of which I learned, many of which I learned at Morningstar. And that's what I like to share.
Great. So if you were to share just kind of a key message for leaders that are struggling with this complexity, bureaucracy, and so on, what would be the kind of key thing for them to think about in this navigating complexity?
Well, I don't think anyone said it better than Dee Hock. Dee Hock was the founder of Visa, and he wrote books on chaordic organizations, balancing chaos and order. And he famously said that complex rules cause simple, stupid behavior. But simple rules allow for complex, intelligent behavior. And I want leaders to opt for complex, intelligent behavior achievable only through very simple rules.
That's great advice. I love Dee Hock and Chaotic Organizations. That's a fantastic book.
Very interesting. But Doug here, he's talking about bureaucratic structures and rules and regulation, and they all came from the Industrial Revolution at the end of 1800 something. Why was this bureaucratic structure so important during those times?
I think it served a huge purpose, and to have organizations to be able to scale up and make cheaper products, and it has helped to increase the wealth of our society. But they were based on the assumption or the fact that there were a lot of uneducated workers. Not everyone even knew English, for example, or you had to kind of instruct them. So also information was very centralized. So you had to kind of have management as a central point and then telling people what to do.
So you mean Taylorism was kind of the beginning of the whole thing, and maybe just to explain for everyone that Frederick Winslow Taylor, he was, some people call him the first management consultant, and the problem he had during this time was there was a big difference between education level. I know at least here in Sweden, it was like most people only had like 5 years in school, like 95% even. But there were few people that had enough education to be able to run those very advanced machines that were coming. And the problem was that they couldn't run the machines because they were limited. They had the education, the knowledge for it, but they were limited to very few people. So that was kind of blocking for the Industrial Revolution. But Taylor came up with a fantastic idea. He said, instead of having the well-educated people to run the machines, instead they should just give kind of instructions to less educated people so they could run the machine. So instead of understanding how the machine works, the less educated person should just know that if something like something whistles, then you should press this button. And suddenly he actually solved the problem, because now the uneducated, which were a lot of people, and they were unemployed because machines were taking over their jobs, now they could be working on the machines as well.
Yeah, so it made sense in that time, of course. But yeah, the name of our pod is Leading in Complexity. But so today in the complex world, it doesn't make sense anymore.
Okay, so there were many reasons to centralize information, both that it was expensive to spread, but also that, very few were educated to be able to take decision on this information. Though, but the interesting question is, why do we still have those bureaucratic structures when we live in a world where information is cheap and it's moving in the speed of light? And I think we could talk a little bit about this part. And what would you say are the biggest reasons?
I think it's a bit fascinating that if you look around outside, not much is left since 150 years ago, but still our management structures are very similar. And I think mainly it's because we're still teaching them in business schools, in MBAs, etc. They're still taught, and also that is what is expected about from managers and so on.
Yeah, and I think that people, when they are in uncertainty, they don't like that. They want to have certainty, so they are looking for some old habits, like, okay, this might not be the best way, but we know that it worked because it worked before. So we tend to go to what we are used to, instead of, as they did at the Morningstar, trying to invent the new way of working, which is much more inspiring and faster.
Yeah, I've noticed, for example, when companies want to do an IPO or become public, or when they scale up, the tendency is to build this management structure just because that's expected. And if you want to sell your company and the buyer expects it to be kind of organized and structured in a traditional way, yeah, it's often that you go that route, even if you intentionally maybe start as a startup, you typically don't have the structure, but then it tends to just go that way. And once you've built that hierarchical kind of traditional structure, then it's kind of start to reinforce itself and be very stable.
Yeah, and I also think there's something in the system, so to speak. Like there are no real incentives to break down those structures, especially if we talk about the hierarchies, where it feels better to have a lot of reports to you. It feels better to be the one taking decisions, and just to make it even harder to break down, we also make sure that people higher up in the hierarchy get better paid. So there are really no incentives to break or tear down the pyramids, as Janne Carlson said many, many years ago.
Yeah, I remember a colleague talking about a big traditional company, and they actually had some rewards for managers that had more than 100 people in the unit. So once you got over 100, you had a lot of privileges. You get better parking space or better company car and things. And of course, the units tended to be just about 100 people.
That was a limit. Like if you had more than 100 employees underneath you or reporting to you in some way, that meant you had a more beautiful car or better parking space or something.
Yeah, and then there was the next level, like 200, I think. So yeah, so it's also built in the recognition of the organization. So rather than promoting, like if you can do the same operations with less than 100, then you should be rewarded, not the opposite.
So we have a self-reinforcing loop here.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, that explains why it's so hard to change. And of course, it's if you organize in a different way, as long as it works, everything is fine. But we know that in this complex world, nothing is always working. We will always fail sometimes. And as soon as we fail, someone will say, okay, this is the end of this strange way of working. Time to go back to the ordinary, the thing we have seen before.
Yeah, that's so typical. I've been in organizations where I kind of stop reintroducing old bureaucratic processes, maybe 2-3 times. The same organizations, there's an incident, someone says, oh, it's because this process is missing, and then they want to reinstall it. And I've seen kind of improvement, agile transformations, you have a good success for 6 months. One incident happens, one problem happens, and everything is put back in place as before.
Yeah, it's like we need to have a bureaucratic detox.
Yes.
And stay away from it. It's like being dependent on smoking or something like that. So Doug is also talking about Dee Hock and his idea of chaordic organization. That I guess that is, it's both chaotic but ordered in some way. I think this needs someone to explain what it is.
Yes, so Dee Hock, sadly, he died about 2 years ago. He was over 90, but he was still active and kind of... he was an inspiration not only for Doug, but for me as well. And I love the book about Visa, how we created Visa. And he was a farmer boy and grew up on a farm. And he learned about complexity, kind of living close to nature. And when he then started working with organizations, he came up with this chaordic way of organizing. You need the flexibility, ability to handle unforeseen things like in chaos, but also you need some structures and stability. And he got when the credit cards were new, each bank in US, they wanted to have their own credit card. And of course, for a shop where you have many banks, you would end up with so many credit cards, and as a consumer you would need many credit cards. So he was able to unite a lot of competitive banks to come up with Visa, and Visa was structured in a really self-organized, self-managing way without any titles, etc. So that was, he did kind of impossible there.
How interesting. Doug is mentioning a quote from Dee Hock. He says this: complex rules cause simple, stupid behavior, while simple rules allows complex, intelligent behavior. I think it would be good with some examples here. Could we start with an example where the complex rules create simple and stupid behaviors?
One common thing today is that most people are so remote from the end user of what they create. Often you're not allowed to talk with users or customer clients directly. There's many steps maybe from you actually knowing what the need of the consumers that you're working with, or the customers. So all these handovers makes it extremely complex.
And I think those things comes from the idea that they want control. If we go back like 100 years, control was a big problem then. We didn't have control. So we added a lot of things like budgets and there's hierarchies, etc., just to get control. And I remember a situation with a client where we found out that this way from the customers having a need until we had delivered a product to the customer, it was a lot of things in between, forums that had to say yes or no to things, etc. And when I was showing this to a manager at the company, I remember how she was like, wow, this is crazy. And I hope that she will say, well, let's simplify it. Take away those forums. I think people can make those decisions themselves. They don't need to go to a manager or a couple of managers that are meeting once a month or something to take the decision if to go ahead or not. But instead of simplifying, she said, oh, we need to hire more assistants that could help the projects go through this horrible way from the need to delivery. So it's kind of in a lot of us, just to accept, okay, this is a horrible process, but let's have more guides instead of making the process so simple that everyone can navigate it. So we are adding more and more complexity and bureaucracy all the time.
I remember a management team, I was talking about complexity, and then they realized that we've just approved going from 13 quality controls to, I think it was above 30, and just adding those controls maybe won't actually improve the quality.
But the problem, if you look at every control, it will probably be like, what if? Oh, we can't take away that, because if we do that, we will be hanged if something happens. So we are adding, but it's very hard to take away.
Yeah.
It also reminds me about those descriptive process frameworks. For instance, the whole agile movement was kind of a reaction to rational unified process becoming very popular. And rational unified process, they had like 11,000 pages describing how you can deal with different situations. It was trying to answer every problem that you could pop up. So if you compare that with the Scrum guide, it's actually going from 11,000 pages to 13 pages, much more lightweighted. And Scrum was called a lightweighted process framework in the beginning.
Yeah. Thinking about stupid behaviors and policies, I remember some course participant I had that shared that one day, this was a small bank, and one day the fire brigade came out to the bank. And the reason was that there was a big risk of fire because the whole attic was full of newspapers. And how can you fill the whole attic with newspapers? That because there was a policy that was 50 years old, At one point, the CEO had been so angry about not finding today's paper that he had set a policy that from now on they should always have 2 copies of the daily paper and one should be stored. So 50 years later, they were still storing the newspaper, and now the attic was full.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, so let's move over to some example of simple rules.
Yeah, and I think we talk a lot about self-management here, and self-management kind of is based on having some simple rules, and then people can self-organize within it. And even if you think about birds, for example, when they fly, they have I think the research shown that there's like 7 simple rules to kind of organize birds in when they're flying and navigating. Of course, when we talk about human system, it's more complex, but still, just a couple of simple rules can enable teams to self-organize, like having a clear goal, purpose, and working approach. And then within those kind of boundaries, you can then self-organize. So that really enables self-organization, I think.
That reminds us of Netflix. I remember when we had this conversation with Erin Mayer, she said that they had very few rules, like do what is best for Netflix. That's a very simple rule. It's easy to follow, easy to remember, and it gives a lot of room for you to navigate and handle complexity.
Yeah, I think the book is that she wrote is called No Rules Rules, right?
Yes, exactly. And sometimes it's just as simple as saying, okay, this is a problem. We have some boundaries we have to be within, and we want you to collaborate with X, Y, and Z and solve the problem. That could be so simple. And also I'm thinking of meta processes. I was at one company where they were figuring out what could happen, and they were starting to write policies and how to handle every single situation. And I said, wait a minute, all of those have the component that a lot of people need to be involved. Different skills need to get together. So at the end, we said, if something happens that we're not used to, that was unexpected, just get the right people in the room and they will solve the problem. That was a very simple, what we can call a meta process. Instead of having exactly when this happens, we should do it this way, and when that happens, we should do it that way. And you have a thick book with all those. Exactly when this happens, we should do exactly like that.
I'm thinking of like task force teams. Like when I ask organizations,
Exactly.
when did you really perform or had like a really effective work? And then people often remember, oh, this task force, we came together across different disciplines, different competence, different units, and we just solved the thing in a few days rather than going through all the hierarchical bureaucracy, ordinary kind of working channels.
And as we talked about early in some early episode, getting the right people in the room. And then what we talk about when we say the right people are the people having the information about the problem, the people that can fix the problem, and also the people that can take the decision. And if we talk about Morningstar, where we have a lot of room for taking decision, then that will probably be included in the first 2. So then we just need to talk about who have information about the problem and who have the skills of fixing the problem, and they take the decision needed to fix a problem.
Yeah, I can recommend if you search for Morningstar on YouTube, there's some really good videos about how they operate, and there is kind of really good example of just one worker at the line buying a new engine or some parts for quite expensive things. And the thing is that you just have to be accountable for your peers that this was a good investment. And we kind of mentioned that in a traditional company, there was no way that would fly, that he would get that permission. But you are expecting responsible and accountability in Morningstar. Okay, I think this was a exciting topic today, and let's wrap up. So we are curious about your comments, your questions, and please share it in the comment section. Also share our pod with colleagues and friends, and check out all the other episodes at leadingcomplexity.com/podcast.
Thank you for listening.
Thanks.